Good morning. It's good to be here. I wasn't quite sure if I would be. I had treatment on Monday, and so I am still a little bit side effecty, but I'm going to do my best. And we're in chapter 11 of Romans and starting at verse 11. Just be patient with me. Thank you. So Paul is in the midst of chapter 11, which is this huge discourse on who's in and who's out. And that's the conversation that goes on everywhere all the time. Who is in and who is out. And so he does say, yes, the Jews were God's chosen people, and that's great. But they haven't recognized the new thing that God did in Jesus Christ. Hey, Betsy, you're becoming a regular. So anyway, Paul said that, yes, the Jews are the chosen people, but when they didn't recognize what God was doing in Jesus Christ, then they kind of opted out of this new faith experience. So he's having this conversation, and it continues in verse 11, and I'm reading about through verse 24, 25. And he brings in the image of grafting into a tree. And this would have been something that was pretty familiar in their world, particularly if it was an olive tree, which some of the translations say it was, because they made their living from vines, grapevines or olive vines, olive trees. And so it's really common ground for them. We probably in your life, you haven't grafted anything into anything else. But that's the imagery he's using. Now, Paul's concern is that he clearly explains what God is doing. I think that's impossible, but that's what he wants to help people to understand, at least what his perspective is of what God is doing in Jesus Christ and what these new people coming to faith in Judaism, because that's really what it was, a reform movement in Judaism, and what it means in their lives. So here we go, verse 11. The next question is, are they down for the count? Are they out of this for good? Meaning the Jewish folk who haven't gotten on board. And the answer is a clear-cut no. Ironically, when they walked out, they left the door open and the outsiders walked in. But the next thing you know, the Jews are starting to wonder if perhaps they had walked out on a good thing. Now, if they're leaving triggered this worldwide coming of non-Jewish outsiders to God's kingdom, just imagine the effect they're coming back. What a homecoming. Hey, Linda. But I want you to go on about them. But I don't want to go on about them. It's you outsiders, again, Gentiles. It's you outsiders that I'm concerned with now, because my personal assignment is to focus on the so-called outsiders. I make as much of this as I can when I'm among my Israelite kin, the so-called insiders, hoping that they're realizing what they're missing and want to get in on what God is doing. If they're falling out and initiated a worldwide coming together, their recovery is going to set off something even better. Mass homecoming. If the first thing the Jews did, even though it was wrong for them, turned out to be your good, just think what's going to happen when they get it right. Behind and beneath all of this is a holy, God-planted, God-tended root. If the primary root of the tree is holy, there's bound to be some holy fruit. Some of the tree branches were pruned, and you wild olive shoots were grafted in. Yet, the fact that you are now fed by the rich and holy root gives you no cause to gloat over the pruned branches. Remember, you aren't feeding the root is feeding you. It's certainly possible to say, other branches were pruned out so that I could be grafted in. Well and good. But they weren't pruned because they were dead wood, no longer connected by belief and commitment to the root. The only reason you're on the tree is because your graft took when you believed, and because you're connected to the belief nurturing root. So don't get cocky and stretch your branch. Be humbly mindful of the root that keeps you lithe and green. If God didn't think twice about pruning shears on the natural branches, why would he hesitate over you? He wouldn't give it a second thought. Make sure you stay alert to these qualities of kindness and ruthless severity that exist side by side in God. Ruthless with a dead wood, gentle with a grafted shoot. But don't presume on this gentleness. The moment you become dead wood, the game's over. And don't get to feeling superior to the prune branches down on the ground. If they don't persist in remaining dead wood, they could very well be grafted back in. God can do it. God can perform miracle grafts. Why, if he could graft you, branches cut from a wild tree, into an orchard tree, he certainly isn't going to have any trouble grafting back in the branches that grew from it in the first place. Just be glad you're in the tree and hope the best for others. So here's Paul with this imagery of trees and branches and who's in and who's out. And I think of how much energy as a church we spend on deciding who is in and who is out, who's got the good news and who doesn't, who has the belief system and who doesn't. And when Paul talks about pruning the dead wood and God doing that, my belief system says that we do that to ourselves. That when we separate ourselves from God, who is constantly reaching out to us, when we put other things in front of God, and what we do and where we put our energy, when we do things that we know God does not approve of and breaks our relationship with God, then we become dead wood and separate ourselves from the, as Paul would put it, the holy root. God doesn't need to work on that. We do that fine ourselves as far as I'm concerned. But I do believe that, as always, God has opened up this faith relationship in Jesus Christ to all people, who Paul talked about as outsiders, or the language of the Bible would say Gentiles. That everyone, everywhere is welcomed into this new holy root that Jesus Christ has begun. And what amazes me is that the church continues to not see God's holy work of bringing in people who we never thought could be brought in into this relationship, and that we want to vet whether they really meet our standards or not. And I've said this a lot over the, almost 4 decades that I've been ministering, that for Jews to welcome Gentiles into this new understanding of Judaism. Again, that's what Christianity was. It was a new understanding of Judaism, a new thing that the Jewish Messiah had done. We didn't get the name Christian until sometime, maybe 20 or 30 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. So this new concept within Judaism, to welcome in uncircumcised, to welcome in Gentiles, to welcome in those who were seen as barbarians, is as distasteful as many people feel about welcoming persons who are not heterosexual. Whether they're homosexual, bisexual, questioning, queer, whatever label they understand themselves to be, for people who are very, very Christian, very righteous, I would ask them to think about how astoundingly just mind-blowing it was when Peter, again, the rock on which the church was built, said that all were welcome through the vision of the unclean food coming down at Joppa. Again, we did that story during Acts while I did that. And that was, and then Paul picked up the ministry and really ran with it. So as unappealing as it was to say that everyone is welcome, That to me is where some people are in terms of welcoming those who are not heterosexual. I've said that in I don't know how many different settings, but Paul wants us to know that whether you believe, again, my line of reasoning in the way that I see it, you don't have to, but that's the way I see it. Paul sees those who are seen as just so unclean, uncircumcised, Gentiles, outsiders. Those persons are being grafted in to this holy root because they believed, not because of anything they did, not because of the way that they behaved, not because of any ritual that they performed. They were welcomed because of their belief that Jesus Christ is God's Son, and welcomed that relationship into their life. Now, what it meant for them in terms of how to change their behavior or how to live after that, that really is their relationship with God. And I have been talking about that for the last forever, but it's not our judgment. It just is not our judgment about what some other person's relationship with God looks like and whether or not they feel comfortable and right in their relationship according to their behaviors. It is how they live. Again, I've known throughout my years people who have come to church and seemed to be, keeping up with the dailiness of what it is to be a Christian, and all the time been having extramarital affairs. And for them, somehow that worked and somehow that justified that. But in the church just said basically nothing. And again, I've always said this too, is that if there's strong language from Jesus about how we live out our sexuality, divorce is some of the strongest language that he gives. And thank you. Hi, I'm divorced. And thank you for that. But so I just think, I like Paul's last words, which were, just be glad you're in the tree and hope for the best for others. To me, that says a whole lot. I believe that I've been grafted into that holy root. I'm trying to live like it. I'm hoping that I don't look like deadwood, but that's between God and me. And I don't have a right to judge anybody else's liveliness or aliveness in Jesus Christ. Paul, I think, felt like he did, but he was in an environment where he was really out there in terms of what he told people and what he said to them. And the Jewish community, and Jerusalem particularly, had put out a contract on his life several times, and of course had beaten him up and thrown him out of towns. So he was real clear that what he said about outsiders being welcomed in was very abhorrent, and just really something they didn't want to hear to the Jewish establishment. So I'll give Paul, whatever he wants in terms of kudos and a right to say who's in and who's out. I've never felt like I had that right. But anyway, Paul wants to say that in this new faith, this new root of faith in Jesus Christ, that root has been opened up to new grafts, because those who were in the tree didn't want to see what God was doing. They ousted themselves, saying that God would not bring the Messiah as a person who looked like Jesus of Nazareth, and certainly wouldn't let him be killed as a criminal. That makes no sense to them. And so they said, nope, that's not something God could be doing. And for Paul, they made themselves dead woods, and God cut them out of the tree. Again, 2,000 years later, I'm not quite sure that's exactly how it looks like, but I don't know. What I do know is that I agree with Paul that we should just be glad we're in the tree and hope the best for others, and that everyone is welcome. Everyone is welcome. Outsiders, insiders, those who we imagine would easily fit into this faith, and those who we could never imagine being a part of the family of God. Everybody, because God's vision is so much broader and so much more wonderful than ours. So here's Paul trying to explain a spiritual and theological truth that even though those who are Jewish, who Jesus the Messiah came to save, many of them did not believe that that's what God did. And that's okay, because that's what those people believed. And that God used that to welcome those whom people thought would never be welcomed, those who were considered outsiders. So just be glad you're in the tree and hope the best for others. I'm glad I made it through. And hopefully I'll be having better days ahead after treatment. So thank you guys. Good to see you. Bye.